Thank you all for coming. My name is Peter Foreman. I'm president of the South Shore Chamber of Commerce, and I appreciate you all coming on a beautiful summer morning. I know a lot of people are traveling on vacation, but I want you to know that our guest speaker just got back from a long trip. He traveled overnight from Syria and is here and without much sleep. So thank you very much, Congressman, for making this your first stop after a very, very long trip. We appreciate it. And we'll give you a chance to get your
third cup of coffee so you can speak in a couple of minutes. We have a couple of events coming up that I just want to have you make note of and put on your calendar. If you are enjoying the summer weather, this evening at the Chamber's offices in Rockland, we have our In Our Backyard series, very informal greet and meet and cocktails and beer and wine in the backyard of our property, and it's a lot of fun. Our office at Jack Spur's property at A.W. Perry. But feel free to stop by. September 10th, we are going to have an 11:44 hearing from our national consultants on economic development and the Secretary of Economic Development for the state, Craig Bilecki. We'll be talking about our big project on looking at the region's economic development and the future for the next 10 or 20 years, which is a major study that we're undertaking, and we will have an opportunity to hear some initial thoughts from the consultant and talk a little bit about why this project is so important to the South Shore. On October 9th, we have Tech Connect. We're taking a break for a year from our traditional business expo, and we're trying something a little different with the Tech Connect. This is not a technology show. It is an opportunity for all of us to see how some of our members and businesses are using technology to improve their businesses, and hopefully all of our members will get some ideas by going through that and get some ideas on how to apply some technology, and it should be pretty exciting. It will feel and look a little different than the Business Expo because it is not our traditional Business Expo, but please make an effort to come to that. And then October 30th, we have our cultural bus tour, a little different than our old real estate economic development bus tour. Jeanette Travellini from Braintree Cooperative is heading up the committee on that, but it's driving the creative economy, because part of what we're looking at with our economic development for the next decade or so is looking at the creative economy, the cultural economy, and this bus tour will be an interesting chance to see just how cultural the South Shore is, for those of you who think we don't have any culture here. And it is interesting. I had, you never know who you're going to run into that is part of that. I had lunch yesterday with Paul Pecci, who's president of Braintree Cooperative. Turns out he is a professional artist as well as a banker. Never knew that. If you go into South Shore Hospital, I guess in the lobby, in the main lobby, is one of his works. So Paul, maybe you're responsible for the higher cost of health care because you're so but very interesting. You know. Creative banker, that's nice. A lot happening politically. Yesterday, the governor signed the Southfield reorganization bill. This has been a torturous process to get the governance right at Southfield, which is the site of the largest development project in the state. The governor signed it. We've been very active working with our legislative delegation, which has been spectacular on this issue, and our local officials in Abington, Rockland, and Weymouth. Governor signed it. You'll be hearing a little bit more about that, and I think we are planning a ceremonial bill signing after Labor Day. Tomorrow, we are doing a ceremonial ribbon cutting down at Enterprise Park in Marshfield. Representative Cantwell and Senator Hedlund are organizing this, but the traffic lights are finally in. We were very active with the Marshfield Chamber, pushing the widening of 139. which is going to be important to opening up commercial development in Enterprise Park. The light is in, and we will have the Secretary of Transportation down for that. That is when? Where's Jim? At 11 o'clock tomorrow. So come on down, create a traffic jam, and we will have that. Glad to be joined by a number of elected officials in addition to our guest speaker. Representative Jeff Deal, who was helpful to us on the Tri-Town legislation, is here. Representative Jim Cantwell, Representative Walter Timilty, Bill O'Donnell, Norfolk County Register of Deeds, is here. Dan Shores, candidate for Congress, was going to try to make it. Don't know if he's made it in yet, but there's a heavy Republican primary down in the 9th Congressional, Cape and up to about Marshfield, and some of them will be here. We have a number of people here from Quincy, and I just want to take a moment for those who may not know. Both Senator Keenan and Mayor Cope are going to join us today. Sadly, the mayor's older brother died very unexpectedly yesterday. So for the people from Quincy, our thoughts with you and the mayor. We know this is a tough time for the family. Obviously, they are not joining us today, but please let the mayor know that the chamber extends our sympathy to them. We have a number of new partners. Our partners are what make these events possible. So much of what we're doing with the economic development work is because of our partnership, and we have some new partners who signed up in the last couple of months. South Shore Medical, Bill and Paula Harris from WH Cornerstone are with us, Ken Kirkland from KAF, Roomscapes Design, Cam Snyder. So thank you for all the new partners and all of our existing partners. We appreciate it very much. Traditionally, we have a lead sponsor for these events, and our lead partner sponsor is Starwood Land Development. Starwood is the master developer for Southfield. They are a critical partner, not just of the chamber, but of the South Shore and our future, because of what is going to be built down at the former air base. So, as our lead sponsor, I would like to invite to the microphone to say a few words, Matt Barry.
Good morning. Thank you, Peter. Peter has taken all my best news, but I think it's good enough news that I will repeat it. The governor yesterday signed the legislation that we had proposed to reform Tri-Town for the Southfield development. We're very excited with that development for us. We're thankful to all the work and effort of the local elected officials, the state officials, too numerous to name given the time frame Peter's given me, but their efforts are really what is required of a public-private joint venture. It is what was required to get this legislation passed. It is what we will require going forward. We're very thankful to the Chamber for all of their help and promotion of the work that went on. In perfect timing, the Chamber is running an economic development study, which will be very useful for us. Peter often talks about how important Southfield is to the South Shore. Really, this economic development study will show to us how important the South Shore is to Southfield and how we need to understand that work and we need to understand how to make that come together. What the legislation has given us is the ability to start. And so this is still a complicated project. This will still take us longer than most people believe, but we're confident in our ability to do it. And I believe every person in this room will contribute to the success of Southfield. Now, I'm not asking you to quit your jobs and grab a hammer and come down to the site, but I do believe there's a lot of opportunity. Some of you will do that. You'll provide the services, the goods that we need to construct the site. Some of you will provide the mortgages that our homeowners will need. You'll support the businesses. You'll support the entrepreneurs who will open businesses at Southfield. You may also just come to the ball fields with your children. Let them play soccer there. Go come to the village center and eat dinner there. And I think every single person will contribute to the success of Southfield. So we look forward to that opportunity, because although we are confident that we can do this, we know we can't do it alone. So the growth of Southfield and the growth of the whole South Shore starts with existing businesses that are growing. The Chamber knows that. The Chamber this year is led by someone who runs a business like that, Bay Copy. They are a second-generation family business that's growing, that's leading businesses. It's a leading business in the community and run by a business leader. And it's a great opportunity for me to introduce Ray Belanger, who will come up and introduce our speaker for the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Sometimes we have a speaker who needs no introduction. We all know Steve Lynch, or know of him. He's the former president of the Iron Workers Union, was elected to Congress in 2001, and serves on the Financial Committee, the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, and Subcommittee on Workforce in the U.S. Postal System, and the Subcommittee on National Security. He also co-chairs the Congressional Task Force on Terrorism and Proliferation Financing. That's the formal bio, but that really doesn't tell you that much. So I want to tell you a little bit of story about Steve the man. Recently, we had a small chamber event for our partners. I guess about a couple of years ago, we had a lunch, and Congressman got a chance to interact with some of the local business people, and ended up in kind of a spirited discussion with some of our local bankers. We got to the Q&A portion, and one of our bankers directed some very pointed observations about the effect the Congress has on community banking. The congressman also made some very pointed observations and answers back about perhaps some of the bankers' lack of understanding of the nuances of the legislation. And this kind of triggered back and forth some pretty spirited discussion, which may have seemed more like a confrontation on a picket line than a debate with a local chamber person. He took some very direct criticism and was able to give back in kind. The rest of the story is that following that meeting, the congressman asked if he could set up a meeting with the bankers and members of his finance committee to sit down and really discuss some of the issues, which they did. A few weeks later, we got a report back from the chamber that it was really a productive discussion, and there was really an opportunity to get a better understanding how policies made in Washington really filter down to Main Street. As a matter of fact, we had a visit with the congressman last year during the chamber's DC trip, and he asked if we could reconvene that group again to sit down and see really what's changed. So I want to introduce you today to a congressman that can take a pretty good punch. He can give a punch too, and then he's willing to discuss what the punches were all about. The business community needs more officials that are be able to take it when they're told that they don't get it as far as small business, but even more importantly, they're willing to sit down and talk and really listen. Please join me in welcoming our friend, Congressman Stephen Lynch.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you very much for your kind remarks. That doesn't mean we have to have that type of a discussion, but you know, if that's what it is, that's what it is. Thank you very, very much for inviting me this morning. As one housekeeping matter, there's one other elected official who was not recognized. Shana Barnes, who she runs my Brockton office, was recently elected to the Brockton City Council, so she is. And one other matter is the work of Peter Foreman. Now, I fully understand the duty of representing the chamber to Beacon Hill and the importance of that relationship, which it was, I think, illustrated in the Southfield negotiations about working through that whole process. I think our state delegation did a masterful job. Our mayors, and Mayor Sue Kay was keenly interested in making sure we got that resolved. Senator Keenan, I know Ron Mariano, our majority leader in the House, very, very intimately involved in working that out. So we saw during that whole process how important our state delegation was, and the relationship that Peter Foreman has established with the State House was very, very important to that whole process. I also want to say that he has developed a similar relationship, which is much more difficult in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill. And he has really, really developed a sensitivity on the part of the South Shore Chamber to what's going on through myself and Bill Keating, to what's going on in Washington, D.C. and how that affects the chamber. And I think he has really amplified the discussion and the awareness of the Washington delegation, including our 2 U.S. senators, to what's happening here in the South Shore, and also what's happening with businesses generally around the state. So I want to give Peter great credit for the job that he does every single day in making sure that we know what the concerns are of the business leaders and our friends at the South Shore Chamber of Commerce. So thank you, Peter. We've got no shortage of issues to talk about this morning, but I thought I might just sort of give some context about what's going on in D.C., the environment there, and then also talk about specific issues, and then we'll open it up. The question and answer part of this, although it sometimes gets animated, is extremely helpful to me. Rather than me trying to guess what you're thinking about, I know Cam's going to run the question and answer here at the end, but that's really a very important part of this whole discussion, and I look forward to that. So I'm going to try to keep it limited in terms of my remarks, although we do have a lot of issues, and I won't get into the foreign policy stuff unless it's asked for, by the audience. I think that we should probably try to talk about the issues that really affect the chamber intimately and directly on the financial end. In Washington, as you know, there's been considerable conflict and I would say a general inability to get some things done. I think it was painfully obvious during the discussion over the highway and transportation appropriations bill that came out. We were looking for a 5 or 6 year bill that would allow mayors and the governors and our state delegations to get to work on some of the infrastructure problems. That completely broke down. We ended up with a very short-term piece of legislation that used some gimmicks, some pension evening strategies that really gave limited resources to the needs that are out there in terms of infrastructure. So that it showed, I think, in that discussion our inability to get together on just basic things that we all agree on. Fixing roads and bridges and making sure that we maintain the infrastructure that's out there. Never mind the new starts that should probably be initiated as well. But there's some strategy behind that, and I'm not going to, look, I'm not the type of guy that goes around kicking Republicans in the shins just to make myself feel good. And there's plenty of blame on both sides. There is. And, I know I got Jeff Deal out there, my Republican friend, state representative, so this is not we're not going to engage in partisan bickering here. I have enough of that down in D.C. But there is a strategy. There is a strategy. And whether you agree with it or not, the idea among, and I spent a lot of time, I just did a couple of congressional delegations, one over to Afghanistan, one down to, we did Afghanistan, we did China and Mongolia for some reason, and then we did one, and so it's myself and usually 4 or 5 Republicans. It's a interesting experience for me. But we did a trip down to Central America earlier this month, late last month, I guess, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. And I just came back, as Peter mentioned, from Syria and Turkey. But it gives me an opportunity, obviously, to spend a week with people, having breakfast, lunch, and dinner, find out about their families. You also get an opportunity to talk about strategy and what's going on, what's wrong with what's going on in Washington. And there is a strategy on the Republican side that they feel that they may take the U.S. Senate. And look, I'm not going to try to predict that, but I'd say the wind is probably at their back. They need to pick up 6 seats in the U.S. Senate to take control of the Senate. So some of them feel that that it may be advantageous for them not to make a deal right now because they can get a better one in January if they take the U.S. Senate back. So there's a purposeful strategy behind some of our inability to come to agreement. And I don't agree with that strategy necessarily. I think we fall into that pattern often, and I also think the rules of the Senate require you to have more than a simple majority in order to really control legislation coming out of there. And on the heels of that midterm election, we will have the presidential elections coming up, and there'll be other excuses for not getting things done. So, but that is out there, and that sort of overhangs all of the discussions that we have down in D.C., whether it's better to get a deal now or should we wait till after the midterm elections, with so many, with the Democrats having to defend in somewhat a hostile environment so many seats, and the Republicans having to defend so few. So that is contributing to what's going on. But we do have we do have a short list of issues that are on the calendar down in D.C. when we return. As you know, the House has declared that the immigration piece is off the table, although I think we should try to come to some type of resolution on that issue, and the sooner the better. We've got the Export-Import Bank negotiations going forward. There's a certain, not all of the Republicans, but there's a certain line of thinking led by Jeb Hensarling, who's the chairman of our Committee on Financial Services, that the Ex-Im Bank should not be refunded, that we should, basically do away with it. We should not renew its charter, which is hanging in the balance right now. I think September is the expiration, September 30th or something like that. So we've got to get busy on that in a hurry. The Export-Import Bank, for those of you who are dealing with import-export issues, you realize that, and general trade issues, is extremely important to us in the United States. We have I think, proportional support for our manufacturing industries here in the United States. It creates a lot of jobs here. God knows we cannot, I think in the world that we live today, we can't basically unilaterally disarm. You've got China, you've got every major manufacturing power out there providing financing to their local manufacturers to help them be more competitive. Well, that's what the Ex-Im Bank does for us, the Export-Import Bank does for us. Notably, and to some criticism, it works heavily in the airline industry with Boeing. Creates a lot of jobs, creates financing for some countries and companies that would not otherwise be able to buy those planes. And that creates an advantage for us in that area. But they do so in a number of industries, and really it's about creative financing and affordable financing to deal with U.S. manufacturers. It's about creating jobs here. And in the world in which we live, if we don't protect our jobs in a reasonable way, and they don't lose money, they make money. So this is not a proposition where, you know, you have some government agency out there losing money. They're actually making money. The argument is about ideology, unfortunately, whether or not the United States government should, you know, actively get involved, get on the playing field with our businesses, and whether we should support them. Look, every other country in the world is doing it, and we happen to be doing it very well, and we need to do more of it. But this purist ideology sort of connected to the Tea Party a little bit, but I'm not going to kick them in the shins, you know, says that's not something we should be doing, even though we're making money on it. So that's where we are. This is a similar issue we had with Mr. Henseling on flood insurance. And eventually, because he represented a somewhat extreme view on that issue, on the flood insurance issue, even though he was chairman of the committee, they took it away from him. And about 2 weeks after they took it away from him and let me and others sit down with some moderate Republicans on the other side, we had a deal on flood insurance in about 2 weeks. So I'm hoping that Mr. Boehner, who is more of a common sense, let's try to get a deal on this type of thing, type of legislator, I'm hoping that he might do the same on this issue and allow us to sit down with some Republicans across the aisle and work some details out, because there's a deal there. And yeah, we can change the way we're doing things, improve. I think there's always room for improvement, but this idea that the Ex-Im Bank should just go away is going to be very, very harmful to our import-export mix, and it's going to hurt a lot of U.S. jobs. The other piece we have out there is terrorist risk insurance. This is another issue that I think it needs some tweaking. As you remember, after September 11th, we had a lot of big projects that rely on terrorism risk insurance that did not go forward because insurers were unsure how to calculate the risk of a major terrorist event. And of course, we had the Boston Marathon bombings, and we got a little glimpse of what could happen in the current environment. So we have come up, Mike Capuano, my colleague from the 7th Congressional District, and who also serves with me on the Financial Services Committee, put forward a bill just to do a straight reauthorization. I certainly prefer that as opposed to some of the ideas the Republican colleagues came up with a proposal. I think Mr. Henseling again was driving this process, which it raised the cap, raised the level at which federal government support, taxpayer support, would come in a situation where we have a major terrorist attack. Right now it's $100 million. So private insurers cover that first $100 million, and then we have the government comes in. So that much is insured privately, and then anything above that, there's a sharing as you go forward. There's a backstop to how much risk the private insurance industry has to shoulder. Mr. Henseling's bill would raise that cap to $500 million. And so it would obviously create a huge amount of exposure that doesn't exist right now in terms of trying to get large, complex construction projects completed. And we've got a fair number of those in the planning stages and in the construction stages in my district and across the country. So that's very, very important. In any event, you know, I think we could raise it because of the appreciation of property and the amount of coverage we're providing. We could tweak that number. It could go to 150 million. I think that would be fair. We could sort of you know, amortize what we're trying to cover here, and I think that would be wise. But going from 100 million to 500 million, I think is going to cause a spike for a lot of our developers and principals in terms of trying to finance some of these larger construction projects. So I think Mike Capuano is a lot closer to where we need to be than the opposition down there. Let's see. I don't want to get too too bogged down in this stuff, but we've got some concern down there regarding these inversions, these tax inversions, where U.S. companies with large operations here, purchase a small affiliate in a foreign country, and all of a sudden they're not paying U.S. taxes anymore. Obviously, if that keeps up, we will erode the tax base in this country, and I think unfairly allow some big companies to escape any tax liability in this country. So there's some legislation out there as well. The President has also threatened to use an executive order to stop that trend. I think that it'd probably be better to sit down and work with some of these larger companies and talk about why they're looking at these moves, rather than just by presidential edict created prohibition. I don't think that helps. I think that's it. Maybe that might be just a threat on the part of the President, although he has shown an affinity for that type of measure in recent months. As Ray talked about the community banking piece, we just had another roundtable down in D.C., another subcommittee hearing on how we bifurcate community banking from the larger banking world that was a source of such instability during the recent financial crisis. And we're working every day and with every measure, there's a keen awareness down there on the committee and on the subcommittee about the quantitative and qualitative differences between what we see with our community bankers, the services they provide, the limited risk that they have created in terms of any crisis lurking out there. So there's a much more focused attention on how to help community bankers and our local institutions avoid some of the restrictions and some of the safeguards that are really targeted towards the big banks and the risky behavior that they've engaged in. So we're looking at that, and that comes up in the context of many of our discussions on the Financial Services Committee, whether it be market structure. We just had another roundtable with a lot of these high-frequency traders and exchanges. That's not necessarily the community banking world. So we're trying to make sure that the developments and the fixes that we introduce in that world don't have unintended consequences reverberating back into the world of our community bankers. So we're trying to firewall those regulations so they don't seep into the world of our community bankers. And that's happened in many instances. And it's going to take, as the issues arise, we have to do an analysis, not only how this affects Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan Chase, God bless them, but we also have to see how this is going to affect our local community banks. How is this legislation or regulation going to reverberate into that world? And we don't do enough of that, but because of the good work of Peter Foreman and also your Finance Committee and those of other chambers of commerce around the country, and the community bankers down in D.C., that issue is at the forefront of both the legislative initiatives in Washington, but also with the SEC, with FSOC, as they're coming up with with much of the legislation and regulation not legislation, but regulations that they're required to develop and rules that they're required to develop under Dodd-Frank. So that's out there as well. I'm going to cut this short. I know I've got a little bit here on the Affordable Care Act. Let me preface this by saying I did not vote for the Affordable Care Act, and the longer this bill does not fully phase in until 2018, as you know. But the longer I live, and the more people come to me and thank me, and a bunch of the unions, I took a lot of heat when I voted against the Affordable Care Act, and my reason for doing so was that I actually read the bill. It took a while. I know we got some good lawyers out there, like Arthur Murphy, and who I used to practice against, I guess. But you know, you got to do your homework. And when there's a 2,400-page bill that not only in itself is complicated, but also affects the Social Security Act and other legislation, you really got to drill down. So I remember, you know, my family, my 5 sisters and I generally rent a house down the Cape for a week. We all get together with our kids, and it's usually a very pleasant experience. But I remember that August, when we took up the Affordable Care Act, I ended up sitting in my, you know, my flip-flops and my bathing suit with several huge boxes and a cell phone, and I had my staff working with me, and I spent most of my week on the phone in a lounge chair, but not too far. And every once in a while I'd go for a swim, but you know, sitting and going over this legislation, which it was painful. But that experience, that exercise was well worth it. I felt I came away with a really good understanding of what this bill would do and how it would operate. It would not introduce competition. It would rely on a very complex Rube Goldberg type regulatory structure, and would be extremely expensive, would not drive any of the costs down. In fact, might in fact, and would have an opposite effect. So anyway, as these provisions have started to come into play, strangely enough, the administration has suspended the operation of the Act. They've stopped the cancellation of hundreds of thousands of policies that were supposed to go away under the Act. They've given, you know, delays, 1-year delay on penalties to employers. And there are a lot of provisions in this bill that they have not allowed to go into effect. Now, if I knew that the bill was never going to go into effect, I probably could have voted for it. And I tell them that, no, I got a friendly back and forth with the White House over this. But, you know, I really think 2018 will be a very difficult year for Democrats, for anyone trying to defend this bill. That's when the 40% tax on so-called Cadillac plans will go into effect. So if you have a plan out there that exceeds, I think it's 10,600, I think is the number. Any cost over that plan, any benefit over that plan to your employees will trigger a 40% tax on that amount that the employer provides. So you have a 40% tax over 10,600 for an individual plan. Many of the plans here in 2014, not 18, 14, already exceed that limit. And so, to make a long story short, a lot of the unions that actually ran a candidate against me back in 2010 and tried to force me from office for voting against this bill are now asking me to sign on to the repeal effort to stop the bill from going into effect. So that's more on that later as we move forward. And the difficulty with fixing the Affordable Care Act is when the Republicans sit down at the table and Democrats say, we got to fix this thing, you know, the Republicans say sort of smugly, well, you know, you created this problem, you fix it. So there's that, I think in some cases, some of my Republican friends would rather see us twist in the wind. It's sort of, politically, it's going to be the gift that keeps on giving as this thing keeps on going. So that's the dynamic of this thing, and that's why we're having difficulty getting fixes on this. And we'll just have to stay tuned on that as we go forward. But I'm looking better and better on my vote. All right, I'm gonna stop. Even though I've got my staff did a wonderful job on preparing my notes, but I think they thought this was a weekend issue. But I appreciate things. You know, we've got the lame duck coming up. So other than those issues that are, so we have a short list of things that we're going to try to do in September. The speaker has said that they're going to have a limited calendar in October and probably most of September, to be honest with you, to allow members to go back and to run their elections. I was happy to find out that guest who's running for Congress is not running in my district, so that's a good thing. I might have an opponent. We still haven't got a card from the. There were two gentlemen who pulled papers against me, but we haven't heard if they got their signatures in and are on the ballot officially. So that's still an open question. But again, I want to thank you for your courtesy to me this morning. I want to again thank all my colleagues in government. Did I see Senator Keenan come in? I did. Senator Keenan, good to see you, sir. I'm sorry for your loss, my friend. But thank you very much for having me this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. There are blank index cards on your tables. We will have a chance. You'll have a chance to submit written questions, and as you do, just hold them up, and volunteers or staff will pick them up and give them to our Grand Inquisitor. We do that to avoid our guests having a physical confrontation like we had at our partners' lunch a few years ago.
I asked them to have plastic knives and forks, so they won't come after me.
It was quite a sight to see the president of the South Shore Savings and a congressman on the finance committee shout at each other that the other one didn't know what they were talking about. It was a beautiful thing. We were almost tempted to ask.
I think he was right.
We were almost tempted to have John Boucher act as our Grand Inquisitor this morning, but when I heard you were already coming back from a war zone, we decided we would give you a break. Our Grand Inquisitor this morning is a member of our board, a partner of the Chamber. More importantly this year, though, he is chairman of the Government Affairs Committee. The Government Affairs Committee is stepping up our game in terms of trying to engage both local officials, state officials, federal officials, and put up a legislative advocacy agenda for the Chamber. It's a lot of work. It requires a lot of input from our members. And we have a public affairs group, so our members who don't want to come to a monthly meeting but want to get notices on what may be happening politically, you have an option on our website in your member profile to sign up for essentially political communications on issues that are affecting businesses and government. So with that, I would like to introduce this morning's Grand Inquisitor, who may also tell you don't know what you're talking about. Who knows? I don't know if you do quite what happened at the partners' lunch, but please welcome the president of RoomScape's Cameron Snyder.
Questions already? Well, I know, Congressman, that you shared with me at the table that you just got back from the Middle East last night, so I'm assuming there's a little jet lag. So you'll be happy to know I am not a banker, although I do like a spirited debate. So just kind of a follow-up question. One of my questions was about the fact that you did vote against the Affordable Care Act. So my follow-up question is, how do you see it playing out in the future? We don't know what the elections are going to bring. There is a chance that the Republicans take over the Senate, so they'll control both houses. Do you think that they will attempt to repeal the Affordable Care Act? And if they attempt it, can they?
A great question. Thank you, Cam. Here's the, well, let me just talk about ripeness. Big issues like healthcare reform, it takes a while for them to get traction. You know, we saw attempts at healthcare reform going back to, you know, actually Ronald Reagan didn't really get going. I know that Clinton tried it. A number of presidents have tried it over the years. Truman tried it, but there's a certain ripeness that has to build up before a legislature is willing to just latch onto that and tangle with it. We spent enormous amounts of time on this recent iteration of healthcare reform, the so-called Affordable Care Act. So I think now So I think a certain amount of time has to go by on any issue to go back at it again. And the other problem here is that the bill doesn't really fully go into effect until 2018. So one would think that a realistic and full opportunity to reform the bill or the law won't come into play at least until after 2018, when people really see how bad it is in effect. So one thing I didn't mention on that Cadillac tax, for employees, if there's a proportionate contribution by the employee that exceeds that 40%, excuse me, that limit that triggers the 40% tax, then the employee receives a proportionate tax as well, shares that with the employer. So, you know, the effect on, say, Gillette employees. I went through there not too long ago. A lot of the kids I went to high school with are getting ready to retire. Gillette, even though it's a non-union company, provides wonderful, wonderful health care to its frontline employees. They have basically the same package. If you're, packing razor blades on the assembly line, you basically have the same plan that many of the high-level managers have. So even though your salary might be $65,000 per year, you've got gold-plated. If you're a Gillette, you've got some gold-plated health care, and it's a wonderful morale booster for those employees. They absolutely love it. Well, now Gillette's going to be put in a position where they can't do that for their employees anymore, because they're going to get a 40% tax on their contribution, and the employee is going to get a 40% tax on their contribution. So, because they are way over the limit. So you have, it's a perverse provision. In other words, for the employers that are doing the right thing by their employees, they're going to get punished. And the employees are too. So as I think provisions like that come into effect, I don't know what the hell they're going to do. That's going to be very, very negative. Very negative. And that's one of the mechanisms they're using to fund this plan, this bill. So as that goes forward, I think it will generate a hue and cry for reform. Now, I think Congress will step up. There are other provisions like the medical device tax, that everybody who voted for it is now willing to vote against it. But the problem is they put it into the law, so it's in the law now. Now they're all lining up to repeal it. I voted against it originally. I still think it's a bad idea, and I'm voting to repeal it again, this time as well. But you have all these provisions that are on a timeline, and I think, I think at some point there will be that exasperation among legislators to say, hey, wait a minute, we've got to look at this again. But we're not there yet.
So did you say you voted to repeal certain parts of the bill?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, but I was looking at your voting record, and I think I read it correctly, that when there was a vote to repeal the Health Care Act, you voted against repeal.
That's correct, yeah.
Just out of curiosity, why did you vote against the act, but vote not to repeal it?
Because the bills that they've put out there don't have any of the, I voted for a Health Care Act as well. I voted for a Health Care Reform Act, but it took away it eliminated all the taxes. It's not a tax-driven, the first version was not a tax-driven system. It wasn't a regulatory system. It relied on competition, just straight out competition. It introduced this is something they took out of the bill, introduced a public option where the government would put just a bare bones health care plan out there for low cost, wouldn't have a lot of frills involved, no liposuction, no frills that would drive up the cost of the health care, no plastic surgery, things like that. But it would provide a basic level of health care for most Americans at a very low cost. What that does is it forces the insurers to compete with that plan at a very low level. You could add a few things here or there and compete with that plan. But you'd have a basic safety net plan that would be low cost and it would induce competition. The other thing the bill did that I supported, the one I'm looking for, it also took away the antitrust exemption that we have given to insurance companies. And I know we probably have some insurers out there. But right now, the plan we have allows 1 or 2 or 3 employers in a state to capture the whole market. There's no competition. In places like New Hampshire, you got one basic insurer. You got, because the incumbent insurers have all the people. So to get another insurer into that market, well, number one, that would normally be illegal. I think I've explained this before in this group. But an antitrust exemption basically allows restraint of competition. There's no industry, well, there's only 2 industries in America today that have an antitrust exemption. One is healthcare, the other is Major League Baseball. You can't just go out and start another team because Major League Baseball controls the minor leagues and major leagues, and that you can't compete with them. They've got an antitrust exemption. That's one of the things that's in the healthcare bill, the Affordable Care Act, that allows 1 or 2 insurance companies to control the entire market in some of these states, so you don't have competition. When you have a lack of competition, what does that do? It drives prices up because it creates a cartel or a duopoly or a monopoly in some cases, and allows one insurance company to control the entire market. So none of the repeal efforts, to go back to your question, none of the repeal efforts that have been put on the floor, there have been 49 or 52 or something like that, none of them has included any of that. I voted for that. That was the original House bill. We did not allow them to tax companies and unions. I don't want to tax healthcare. We used to treat healthcare like food. Basic food, you needed to live. Basic healthcare, you needed to live. And we said, you know what, we're not going to tax that because it's a basic necessity. This bill, the Affordable Care Act, introduced a tax on healthcare. We never did that before. And so I think that's a bad way to go. Employers should not be penalized for providing extra health care, additional health care, robust health care for their employees. I think that's a perverse incentive, as I said. So none of those so-called reforms or repeals does any of the things that we need to do to get us to a better place. And so that's why I've chosen to vote against those.
Okay. I have a question from the audience. Earlier you kind of mentioned that the President has signed a lot of executive orders, especially with the Affordable Health Care Act, giving a lot of unions and other groups kind of a pass on it. As a congressman, how do you feel about that, and what are the long-term ramifications of a strategy of issuing so many executive orders?
Yeah, well, I think that's a great question. I think that's what's driven some of the, I know there's litigation, they're suing the President on some of his executive orders. I would say that there's a lot of labor people there that want a lot more changes, that the administration has refused to make changes to their benefit. A lot of these healthcare, I know there are a bunch of people out here that work on Taft-Hartley funds. The Taft-Hartley employers and affiliated unions are complaining vociferously about the penalties just in our state in hundreds of millions of dollars that are being levied against their funds because of the Affordable Care Act. So they've been asking for relief and they're not getting it so far. And what I'm hearing out of the White House is they won't get it. So that's problematic. That's why they're asking for repeal now. The proliferation, I guess, of executive orders also undermines the whole legislative process. I know the President said in his remarks, I think it was the last State of the Union, he's going to do things with his phone and his pen instead of trying to work through Congress, and I think that's a mistake. I think he should really try to engage the legislature, the House and the Senate. We've had, look, democracy is difficult. It is, there's no question about it. I think, what was it, Churchill said, you know, democracy is the worst system we have except for all the rest. And it gets tough, and you have to work at it. You really do. One of the things I'm most exasperated about is you know, I come from a labor background, and I've had some contract negotiations with people in this room over collective bargaining agreements where we have you know, there were ashtrays flying in the room. There were long, hard discussions that we had, and it went for days. You know, we get a place, a hotel room, and you know, we wouldn't come out of there for several days. That's not how they negotiate down in Washington, D.C. They meet for 45 minutes, and then, you know, the Republicans go out and do their press conference, and the Democrats go out and do their press conference, and the White House does their press conference, and we call each other names, and we go away for the next, you know, 2 months, and we don't talk to each other again. That's not how you negotiate. You got to stay at it. It's work. It's not fun, but it's work, and you know, we don't do that. We don't. They have a much different idea about what negotiations mean, and that's troubling. And I think that's contributing to the lack of progress down there. We're not working at it, and I'm not blaming anyone in particular. I'm blaming all of us. We're not working at it, and we need to work at it. We have some serious issues in this country that we need to be dealing with, and we're not working at it. We are not in the way that we should be.
Do you think that's caused by a lack of leadership in the higher level?
Yeah, among all the leadership. Yeah, I think Republican and Democrat. I think there's a lack of willingness there to really roll up the sleeves and you know, get away from this press-centered, you know, media-centered dialogue and try to work things out. You never heard, when Tip O'Neill and Reagan, you never heard the back and forth while negotiations were going on. Matter of fact, you heard silence, until they came up with a deal that they could agree on, and then they came out together and they announced it. That's how they got it done. They didn't engage in backbiting and, you know, one guy going on Fox, the other one going on MSNBC, and then slamming the other. You know, you're not going to get an agreement like that. You will not. You build up too much resistance. So, you know, yeah, I think there's a lack of understanding on how to get to yes among both the Democrat and Republican leadership. And I think they have created an environment that is not conducive to compromise. And I think the blame should be widely shared. I think that you know, we shouldn't single out one group or party or branch of government.
You sit on the Government Reform and Oversight Committee. Do you think the IRS has a credibility problem with audits and lost emails?
You think? Yeah, I do. I think that I think it's been a terrible procession of, it's been painful to watch. It's exasperating, really, to be blunt, to see how the IRS, what the IRS demands of taxpayers, you know, keep records for 7 years, you know, we want everything, every scrap of paper you've got, every receipt, you know, and the level of detail that they require of the taxpayer. And then you see the way they've operated in-house, where, you know, these emails have been deleted. I really, you know, I have agreed with investigations of the IRS. You know, I think that really, if we appointed an independent review rather than a partisan review of what they've been doing, you know, and I also think that there's got to be some type of change and penalties. We've got to incentivize them to keep those records, and there's got to be consequences for the officials who fail in that regard. Because I think that look, I deal with the IRS a lot because I'm on financial services. I think there's a lot of good employees over there that want to do the right thing. There are a lot of good employees at the IRS who are embarrassed by what's going on. They are beside themselves with the conduct of the IRS leadership and what they've been doing, what they've been tolerating. And you know, I think we got to look to get some of those people in the leadership and really restore the integrity of the IRS and some other federal agencies as well.
What I see on the news, I haven't seen a lot of outrage over especially the lost emails and the IRS in general from Washington. Do you think the Justice Department has handled the investigation well, or is there an investigation going on below the surface that we don't know about?
There is an investigation going on right now. There are several, to be honest. But I think there's outrage. I think there's outrage. I think that I think some members of both parties are holding their fire to try to figure out what to do next and how far and how wide to cast the net beyond Lois Lerner to bring those people to account. I know we've put some provisions in now that weren't in place before. We've put some, and I've co-sponsored and voted for penalties for federal employees to claw back any bonuses that they might have received while this was going on. We've supported that. We've also created legislation that would make it easier for the administration to fire someone who engaged in this type of conduct. The problem is that there were provisions to pull Lois Lerner out of there rather than allow her to collect her salary for another 4 months while the investigation was going on. So that language is already in law, but the administration, her boss, did not choose to pull her out without pay. They allowed her to stay in her job while this investigation was going on with full pay. Now, that responsibility is not with the law, it's with a decision not to use it.
One more question on the IRS. You talked about corporations going overseas, obviously, to get lower tax rates. Do you feel that the corporate tax rate, and maybe the entire tax system, but particularly the corporate tax rate in the U.S. is too high?
Well, I think we could get a lower rate if we close some of the loopholes. I really do. I think if we had a blended tax rate, it could actually come down. But we've got some gaping holes where we allow some responsible parties to avoid any of their tax responsibility, and so because you've blown a hole in the in the tax receipts side in selected industries, we've created this inequity, and so I think if we went at it, we could arrive at a lower corporate tax rate by closing the gaps, closing the loopholes, and make everybody put everybody on a level playing field.
But not actually reduce the tax rate.
Oh, we could. I think we could. I think we could.
Right, I have one more question, so my last one, I'll make it an easy one for you. In your opinion, you just came back from the Middle East, what should the U.S. be doing in the Middle East, particularly Iraq? Should we get involved militarily? And what should we be doing about ISIS? And do you consider ISIS a direct threat to the U.S.?
Okay, great question. I'm glad you saved that till last. Well, I've spent, Kim, I've spent a lot of time in the Middle East, a lot of time in Pakistan, Iraq, Afghanistan, but especially Iraq. I think I've got like 14 trips over there. Spent a fair amount of time with the Kurdish leadership there, Jalal Talabani. We've got a new leader in there now. But northern Iraq, where we're seeing a lot of this activity right now coming out of Syria with ISIS, is in the Kurdish territories. Northern Iraq has always been one of the more stable areas of Iraq. The Kurdish regional government has been very effective in administrating its economy. It's had a relatively stable government there for some time, even in the midst of a war in the country. They've also, impressively, I think, and I'm talking about the KRG, the Kurdish Regional Government, they've also provided very good protection for religious minorities, both the Yazidis and some small Jewish groups, Christian groups in northern Syria. So they've had an administration that has respected freedom of religion. They could do a lot better on some other aspects of individual rights. I have deep exceptions that I've expressed to them on many occasions about how women are treated, and about, you know, I've had conversations where I've said, look, if you want the West to respect you, you've got to have freedoms for your daughters, for your wives. So they are not the Boy Scouts. They are not. And we need to make sure these forced marriages, honor killings, things like that. So the Kurds are not the Boy Scouts, but they're a hell of a lot better than ISIS. They've also got plenty of people on the ground, which would allow us not to put U.S. sons and daughters on the ground. So I have written to the President. I was the first one out of the box to say, the Kurdish Regional Government came to us, came to me and to the Speaker, and said, we need heavy, lethal weapons to fight ISIS. And they've got a disciplined military, but they are not an offensive military. They are, to use General Petraeus' term this weekend, we talked about this at length. I was at a conference in the Middle East, and he said they're more like and he has really drilled down on the Peshmerga. That's the Kurdish fighting force. They are a checkpoint army, he describes. They don't have the logistics and communications and the equipment to do a major military operation offensively against ISIS. They don't. But they could learn, and if we gave the equipment, he feels and I feel that they're tremendously courageous fighters, but they need to be helped with advice, with equipment, especially the communications piece, with the logistics piece, and some of the weaponry that they would need to be victorious over ISIS. And I feel confident that, unlike in the Syria situation, that they would be a responsible military. They would be responsible to their elected leadership, their civilian leadership. Masoud Barzani in particular, I think is an honorable man. I've had dinner with him on several occasions. His son also is a major military commander, but I don't think that we would ever come to a day to say, gee, I'm sorry we gave those weapons to the Kurds. I think they could be, they're very pro-Western. They are secular by nature, and I think they could be an enormous help to that region. Now, I know that the Shia leadership in Baghdad is leery about that. They think that the Kurds will go for Kurdish independence. The Kurds are located not only in northern Iraq, but also in eastern Turkey, and they're actually in northwestern Iraq. So you've got a Kurdish region there that makes some of those governments very nervous. You know, they feel that if those millions and millions of Kurds got together, they would create an independent state, taking a little piece of several countries. I think we can, at least in the short term, and that might happen. And I'm not so sure that's a bad thing, to be honest with you. But I'm not going to get into nation building. All I know is that as part of the Iraq Federation, working with the Sunni and Shia, if we could strengthen that Kurdish component, we would help the situation there. It's like, I talked with some of the Kurdish leadership recently, and they said, if we were at a table, and they said, if this tablecloth was blown off this table, you know, you'd put something down on one corner to hold it down. And that's what's happening in Iraq. The social infrastructure and the writ of government is being blown off the map by ISIS. And we need to anchor one part of the country right now just to give us a fighting chance to introduce stability into that whole country. And that anchor is the Kurdish regional government. And I think it'd be a smart investment in terms of the United States. It would eliminate the necessity to put boots on the ground, because you are not going to eliminate ISIS by airstrikes alone. They will just migrate to population centers where you cannot get at them without massive civilian casualties. And you know, whether that's Mosul or Kirkuk or you know any of the major cities in northern Syria. There has to be boots on the ground if we're going to eliminate ISIS. And I would prefer that those not be American kids wearing those boots. I would rather, the Kurds are saying, we don't want your sons and daughters coming over here and fighting our fight. We will fight our own fight. But dear God, help us with the equipment, help us with the logistics, help us with communications. Let us borrow your satellites, give us the information we need to do the job we need to do. And I think that's an honorable request. And remember who we're fighting here. This is a group that is, you know, intensely committed. And by the way, about 12 to 15,000 effective fighters here we're talking about in ISIS. So, you know, one of the questions I asked General Petraeus, you know, this weekend I said, you know, General, we spent $24 billion over 10 years, from 2003 to 2013. $24 billion training, equipping, and maintaining the Iraq security forces. That's Iraqi Army, Border Patrol, police, $24 billion. We trained over 938,000 Iraqis in those disciplines. And here you have an effective fighting force of 12 to 15,000 Sunni extremists that are tipping over this country. How the hell does that happen? With all those people we trained and all that money we spent. And look, I voted for that funding. So I'm not singling out General Petraeus, but he was our guy. I had lunch and dinner with him way too many times. And we went over this. I actually went out to the training facilities in Amman, Jordan. And that's when we couldn't even train Iraqi forces in Iraq because it was too dangerous. So we had our training facility up in Amman, Jordan. How the hell do we spend $24 billion and then on 938,000 Iraqis, training them to fight, and 15,000 Sunnis come in and take over a third of the country in the matter of a month? So, you know, I asked him, I said, you know, what did we do wrong here? What did we do wrong? So, you know, they blame it on a failure of leadership, that Maliki came in and dismissed all of our generals. I don't necessarily buy that one man could screw that up so badly, but that's the explanation that they gave me. But I think it gives us some instructive, you know, input in terms of how we could do that better when we are stepping up to try to help the Kurds in their fight against ISIS. So, you know, I went on too long on this thing, but you know, I certainly think there's a good horse to bet on in this race, and I've been pretty outspoken on it. I wrote to the president. I've asked the president. I think I've only got about 6 or 8 members of Congress who agree with me at this point. But maybe when we return next week, we'll get more. I know other members have had a chance to travel to the region, and they get a sense of it now as well. So that's my hope.
Congressman, thank you for your candor.
Oh, thank you, Jim.
Congressman, thank you very much. I know you're tired from having just flown back from Syria, and I know you are actually running late for another appointment right after this. We really appreciate the time, and on behalf of the chamber, I'd like to present you with this small token. Thank you very much. And feel free to join us tonight in our backyard at the chamber headquarters. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all for coming. My name is Peter Foreman. I'm president of the South Shore Chamber of Commerce. And I appreciate you all coming on a beautiful summer morning. I know a lot of people are traveling on vacation, but I want you to know that our guest speaker just got back from a long trip. He traveled overnight from Syria and is here and without much sleep. So thank you very much, Congressman, for making this your first stop after a very, very long trip.